Ah, the good old days of when I was still a noob to this all-magnificent world that was World of Warcraft. The days of Durotar were long gone, and by long gone I mean like 2 days, and now it was time to move on to the Barrens. I had completed my quest that allowed me to begin taming creatures, and I still remember how excited I was to learn the ability. I also knew exactly what I wanted to tame, of course, a Krucial. On the way to South Fury River, I was definitely sidetracked and tempted to tame a raptor or a scorpion that I came across, but the idea of having a crocodile follow me around was just way too badass, especially after I saw my Tauren friend with his pet, that I couldn't really shake the idea of that from my head. And one thing that I also want to say that I clearly remember was that this was one of the coolest moments in World of Warcraft that I can remember, having my first pet, because back then, not only did it look cool to have a menacing looking croc tail you around wherever you go, but the idea of not being alone as you level, even though the croc was just, you know, an NPC and not an actual real living breathing creature, still made a huge impact on me as a kid and really helped to get me hooked onto the game quicker than a 300-pound kid at the end of a chocolate assembly line without parental supervision. So after I got my badass new pet, I crossed the bridge and went over to the Barrens, and I didn't notice this next part that I'm going to mention immediately. It definitely took a quest or two before I took notice of it, but I definitely still nonetheless noticed it. The chat. The chat was absolutely batshit insane, with tons of people trolling, talking about random stuff, quests, directions, asking some help with killing or doing quests regarding centaurs, who were, by the way, scary as shit back in the day. Ranging from that to also people who were asking for buffs, reporting alliance sightings, and also, of course, Chuck Norris. I think the chat actually stayed this way all the way up to the Cataclysm. When the zone got revamped by Deathwing's Cataclysm, Barrens and the chat really wasn't ever the same again. You can argue that it was the people who changed and not the game, but I can assure you, regarding Barrens chat, you'd be dead wrong. Go on Light's Hope and tell me that this chat is not just saturated with trolls. There might not be Chuck Norris jokes, but there definitely is rampant trolling and an active chat. There is a reason why back in the day, there were people selling shirts that said, "I survived Barrens chat." There might not be Chuck Norris jokes nowadays, but there definitely is still rampant trolling and an active chat. So I've been told. Now guys, before we go on with the story, I just want to say that of course I don't remember every single thing that I did in chronological order all these years ago, so forgive me if it sounds like I'm dancing around the chronological order of certain quests or events, but just keep that in mind. The first thing I remember crystal clear was that I missed a few quests back in Durotar and came to the Barrens relatively early, so despite the fact that I was playing an easy class compared to like a warrior, it was still pretty hard for me because I was a dumbass kid. So this ultimately screwed me up the ass in various moments while leveling in the Barrens, and there were definitely times where I had to skip a few quests or come back to them after finding people to group up with or after I grinded a level or two of just straight up mob killing. I also remembered that I wasn't the only one doing this, which brings me to my first group of friends. We were 4 orcs. Myself and another buddy was a hunter, and the other 2 were warriors. And how did we meet? Well, we were all stuck in the same situation. We were too shitty to do quests on our own or too low level, so we decided to group up and embark on what we called at the time hunts, where we just went around and slaughtered a ton of mobs together, or 4v1 mobs that out-leveled us by 4 or even 5 levels, or maybe even more. I know it sounds really ridiculous nowadays, but there were times back in the old days where you needed to group up to do quests, or in our case, just mindlessly kill mobs to grind levels to be strong enough to do our quests on our own when we got back to it. I'm pretty sure we were all around the same age group, which is why we found it so fun and, you know, came up with the idea of naming it as hunts. Like seriously, grouping up with 4 orcs and running around killing mobs in a huge open world was just so damn amazing back then that I just can't put it back into words. The group of us would also keep in touch as we leveled through various zones, but I think the last time that us 4 were all together doing these hunts was in Stranglethorn Vale, where we raided the Bloodcell Buccaneers near Booty Bay and killed them off. I'm sad to say though that I don't remember all of their names, but there was this one guy in the group that I never forgot. He was one of the warriors and his name was Cameron, which is also the person that I chose to name Chief Officer Cameron after in my Corcoran Officer Machinima series. Now when I was alone and not being carried by my friends, I quickly learned to stay on the damn road. Stray off too far and your ass would get mauled to death by lions, hyenas, quillboar, and raptors, mainly hyenas, laughing pieces of shit. I also remembered having to feed my pet because back then, even Pixels got hungry apparently, so I had to constantly look at his happy or sad part to see if he was going to leave me. I can't remember, but I don't think that he ever left me, and it's not because I remember him not leaving, but it's more of if he left, I'm pretty sure that I would have remembered crying for days because of it. I also remember meleeing a lot. Like if you didn't have your mouse hovering over me and you didn't see my pet, you'd mistake me for a damn warrior. I was always meleeing the enemy, barely ever using my bow actually, that it was pretty damn crazy. Come to think of it, why didn't anyone stop me? It would have made my life so much easier. I also remember struggling to find the right mobs to kill, especially when it came to the quillboar, where people were constantly farming the mobs that I needed. Now, you would think that as a hunter, it would be easy for me to tag these guys quickly, right? Well, let me remind you, I was meleeing. I also never set my pet on passive, so when the pig started fleeing, I always panicked and tried to kill it quickly because I didn't know that you could pull your pet back from chasing the fleeing mob. So when it fled, Crocky over here would be like pulling 12 other damn pigmen back with him to me. These were hard times. I also recall the centaur being scary as shite, especially the ones that you had to kill for quests. Not only were they powerful by their lonesome, but some literally had guards patrols tailing them, which was a big issue considering that one mob by themselves was already a challenge in of itself. There were also times where I would finally muster the balls to send me and Crocky into a fight with 3 or 4 centaur, only to of course be forced to retreat, and then while retreating, run into a centaur and hyena patrol that would maul me into oblivion. Damn hyena laughing bastard. The Alliance Outrunners, they were scary as hell. When I first saw the 4 of them patrolling together, I thought that they were actual players. Of course, I was too low level when I first spotted them, so I didn't see a level on their portrait. I saw a skull, mine, if my dumbass walked into them. I remember just tailing them from a good distance away, but was so curious as to why they wouldn't attack me. I don't think I figured out that they weren't players until like years after. The quest to kill the harpies was also pretty crazy. In certain cases, at least for me, certain harpy mobs were at least 2 or 3 levels above me, which is a huge difference. One that led to me being face down on the dirt with my spirit running back to my lifeless body on numerous occasions. This was also the first time where I had to play the game smart for the first time in my World of Warcraft career. I had to make sure to attack certain harpies in certain angles and positions after they patrolled away from adjacent mobs so that I didn't attack multiple enemies at once, and as a kid, boy was that challenging. Also man, I can't tell you how many times I would be on the verge of death. I'm talking about literally my last hit critting the enemy, which was the only reason that I survived. Many times, one hit would be the difference between life and death, so when I missed with my weapon, I'd just yell at my monitor and clench my ass cheeks. Ah, the good old days. There was also a lot of time spent eating in between each and every fight. You had to keep food and potions on you at the time because a lot of the time a potion would be the difference between life and death, and if you didn't have food, well, best of luck to you because you are going to be AFKing for a few minutes after each mob that you attack. Cultists. One of your first quests in the Barrens, if memory serves me right, is to go to the peak of the mountain that's adjacent to the Forgotten Pools and like imbue some sort of stone that you get from the quest giver starting out with the magic inside of a cave that the cultists possess. The problem is that in order to do this, you needed to enter into one of the caves at the top of the mountain, and it had about like 10 mobs just swarming the area, dry humping each other, so they were pretty hard to separate. Not a fun time, especially if you died, which meant that you had to run up the mountain in your ghost form. The last thing that I really recall from the Barrens was Wailing Caverns. Wailing Caverns will always hold nostalgic feelings for me because it was freaking AIDS. Remember, I was new to this game and quite shit, as were a lot of people, so this in conjunction with each other was a recipe for disaster. Getting a group was one of the easiest parts. The more annoying parts, however, were when you had to run to the dungeon, wait for people to run to the dungeon, wipe on the mobs outside the dungeon, get lost outside the dungeon. Once you get past all the obstacles and kill all the mobs, find your way and actually get into the dungeon, you discover that someone has to go, so you have to go outside and get another member and then escort them into the dungeon if the mobs were respawned outside the dungeon. Fight for your fellow party members for quest items, get wrecked by mobs in the dungeon, get lost in the dungeon, and then quit the dungeon halfway through and leave your quest incomplete because the tank has to log off at 8 PM because it's a school night. Good times. Even after all of this though, I still love Wailing Caverns. It was long, a biatch to get into at lower levels, but Man, it was so cool to make your way in there and just kill a bunch of mobs with a group of people. It was like a more advanced version of Hunt, except like this was what was actually intended for players to do by the game developers. I also remember wiping a bunch and having my gear be broken, only at the time, I didn't know that repairing your armor restored the stats that your armor provided. I don't even think I even like knew what the stats did themselves. So whenever my armor broke and my stats and my HP went down, I would always be so angry and feel like the game cheated me since I thought the game was like bugged or glitched out. But then I remembered that I wasn't playing PUBG. Wailing Caverns sits alongside Razorfin Kraul, Scarlet Monastery, and Zul'Farrak as one of my favorite classic dungeons, and the experience that I'm telling you guys right now of my first experience in the Barrens probably pales in comparison to how I actually experienced it at the time. There were no doubt a lot of moments and feelings that I have forgotten over the many years, but I'm proud to say that I at least remembered this much. One last thing that I do want to add to this video, guys, although it doesn't really hold any relevance to the Wailing Caverns, but nonetheless it was still something that I clearly remember to this day, was how badass I thought Raider Josh and Raider Kerr were. They were the first mounted NPCs that I saw in World of Warcraft, and the minute that I saw them, I thought it was so badass that they were two yoked out scary looking orcs riding menacing werewolves, even though in reality they were half naked and didn't do anything besides patrol down the path of Durotar between Razor Hill and the Valley of Trials. I remember clearly thinking to myself that when I got my first mount, I was gonna go back immediately to Raider Josh and Raider Kerr and ride alongside them on my wolf. And that's what I did, although I only made like one patrol and then I got bored. Also guys, I just want to say something. When I looked up Josh and Kerr, it says that they patrolled in Durotar from the Valley of Trials to Razor Hill, but I could have sworn that they used to ride down the Barrens at one point. I could be wrong, but I could have sworn that they patrolled down the main road in the Barrens. The reason why I mentioned this kind of random statement is because it kind of really bothers me. So I decided to just add this to the video because it just feels like a no, I am your father type of Mandela effect where I need other people to give their feedback on whether or not they remember this too. To sum it all up, guys, my early days of World of Warcraft were kind of cringy, but nonetheless they were super epic and I made a good amount of friends pretty quickly along the way. World of Warcraft nowadays, it may not captivate me as it once did, but I can still nonetheless be glad to say that no matter how it has changed throughout the years, it still made my childhood a very memorable one. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos like this in the future, and until next time, I will see you all later.